Hi, my name is Mark Levitt, and today I'm going to finish with section 5 of Triunistic Model of Reality. So this last section is titled So. And I'll begin. This last section will be the conclusions that I have drawn from investigating the Triunistic Model of Reality. It is here that I will try and tidy up all the loose ends, elaborate on some particular points, and otherwise emphasize the most vital aspects of this illuminating perspective. So, let me start at the beginning, where we can see the evolution of our wisdom that has gotten us to this point so far. When we first approach the topic of the ultimate truth, the simplest version presents itself as teachings as oneness. The most common words to denote the one are God, universe, reality, logos, source, totality, awareness, or this. Today, the topic of truth is best found in the study of non-duality, which reflects a deeper look into this oneness, revealing the union of inseparable pairings. Some of these inseparable pairings are yin and yang, Atman and Brahman, samsara and nirvana, unmanifest and manifest, heaven and earth, subject and object, or the one and many. But the inseparable nature of these pairings is merely stated as a truth, rather than explained in slow, deliberate detail. The union is asserted, but never fully explained just exactly how the one appears as many. This is where the triunistic model of reality comes in. The triunistic perspective is yet another further refinement of the original teachings of oneness that actually details the specifics of exactly how the one manifests as many. The how is referred to as the path of the triune. The original subject matter of any triune is referred to as the base, and it is the specific path of the base that transforms this base into its result or its fruit. The result, or this particular result, is referred to as the fruit of the base, caused by the path. The most general triune would be is, does, and as, or as stated in the Dzogchen teachings, the essence, action, and result. Specifically, each major religion has its own triune. Even though in today's world, most religions do not seem to publicly demonstrate any working knowledge of their own specific triunes, each of them do still claim to be a triune, so I will list the examples of the triune in each major religion, despite the lack of any publicly reported understanding on their part. Just because they do not yet realize that they are actually part of the party is no reason to leave them off of the guest list. So, I list Christianity as having the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Jewish have having Ein Sof, Tznitzim, and Israel. The Hindus have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And the Buddhists have Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. So, we will end with a summation of sorts. What does all of this mean to our everyday existence? How can we apply any of this to our actual lives? And most importantly, how do we bring all of this abstract knowledge into a tangible realization that transforms our potential into actuality. Let us start where we are right now in this very moment. There is an unseen half to your existence, and this unseen half has been behind you this whole time. By simply taking notice of what is in front of you, which is the world, we now begin the path. The next step is to take notice of what is behind you, which is nothingness. Finally, we bring our attention to the center of our experience, where we find the sense of a self. So, the sense of the world in front of us is something that we are accustomed to. Even the sense of a self at our center is pretty obvious. But the sense that there is nothing behind you is a dynamic that is rarely, if ever, spoken of. We casually dismiss this obvious dynamic of our lives, but we do so at our own peril, as this nothingness that always lurks just behind us is actually the other missing half of our lives. This missing half of our lives is our silent half, our still half. The still half is as much a part of our lives, or perhaps even more so, than our acknowledged active half of our lives. I say that the unseen half behind us is perhaps even more a part of our life than the seen half in front of us, because it is only the unseen half of our lives that is behind us that always remains unmoved, unchanged, and unaffected, while the front half of our lives is continually in a state of moving, changing, and succumbing to the whims of everything else that does affect it. Even the very center of our lives is subject to change when you find yourself to be not just a mere individual, but rather aware space for everything that appears. Right now, when you look at the very thing, right now, when you look at the very first thing that arises out of the empty space that you are, you will find arms and legs and a torso if you're sitting down. We will call this your avatar, since it always appears at the very bottom center of your experience, similar to a first-person video game or a virtual reality experience. And what I mean by that is the sense of self, the sense of body, is always popping up right there out of the bottom of the screen no matter what. That's where your avatar is always going to appear. First thing, very first thing to appear on the avatar on the screen is your avatar. And the reason that the very center of our lives is also subject to change is because the particular avatar that you see right now is very much subject to change with each passing incarnation. Right now, when you examine your specific avatar, you may find that you have the arms and legs of a white man, but in a very different incarnation, you could just as easily wake up to find your avatar has the arms and legs of a black female. In fact, you could wake to find that your avatar has the arms and legs or the whiskers and a snout if you should awaken as an animal. Or perhaps your avatar has antennas if you awaken as an insect. Or perhaps your avatar could have some flames out of the center or leaves out of the center if you should awaken as a tree or a sun. But my point is that no matter what you manifest as, the dynamic will always be the same, in that there will always be the perceived in front of you, the unperceived behind you, and the sense of being the perceiver that is directly in the center of your experience. And it is my experience that tells me that no matter whether you were experiencing this world, dreams, the bardos, the astral planes, the afterlife, or anything else that could possibly be conceived, it is all happening right here in this aware space and operating within the same triunistic dynamic of the undifferentiated awareness appearing as another. Even when I was practicing with out-of-body experiences and experienced myself as a disembodied point of awareness, there was still a sense of scenery outside of my direct scope of experience. So my point about how even being the sun or a tree would result in an avatar may not be literally true in the strictest sense of actually perceiving flames or leaves in its periphery, but it's still effectively true because the very sense of being is not reliant upon one particular sense, such as seeing, but rather our sense of orientation to that which is outside of us. It is also my experience that all of these lives or incarnations are experienced as a whole, while simultaneously maintaining their sense of individualization or separation. However, while the individual and the whole are happening simultaneously, the perspective of the whole shares no experiences or details of the specifics regarding the particular incarnation, any particular incarnation. And likewise, the perspective of the individual shares no experiences or details of the whole. We are only capable of experiencing one of these perspectives at a time, as each perspective necessarily cancels the other one out. And so what I was saying there was, in the diamond vision that I experienced, when I was seeing that I was the eye behind all eyes, I was not seeing the details of that specific scene or that specific scene or that specific scene. I was seeing the whole of all of the scenes. And like I said, in that orientation or perspective, you have no perspective or relation context for any of the specifics. And then when you do experience a specific and focus on that, then you lose context of the whole. So it could only be one or the other. One perspective cancels the other perspective out. So now we'll continue. I drew the above picture, the one I just showed you, to capture what I perceived when I saw that I was the eye behind all eyes. But this is not the picture that I would use to illustrate the lasting and permanent effects of recognizing my true nature as aware space. Instead, I would use this next picture as it demonstrates the actual palpable feeling of having all of the entire world appearing in you as aware space. So I showed the first picture of what I think is the best picture to show, to demonstrate what it actually feels like. It feels like the world's inside you. But I was never really satisfied with that picture. I had them actually do another picture. This one was upside down. So for some people, this next picture may evoke the physical feeling that I'm trying to evoke. I'm trying to evoke a physical feeling of you feeling like when you look down and see your chest and your legs and everything, that's the same feeling as when you look out at the world. Or I should reverse that. The feeling is when you look out at the world, you're sensing the road, the cars, the grass, the buildings. You're feeling that physical sense as if it's your body, the same way that you feel your body. And there's a scientific word for how that sense of feeling your body. I think it's called the paracipal sense. And so that's what I was trying to say the feeling is for the world. That paracipal sense extends from just your personal avatar to the world. It feels like the world is your body. All right. What I discovered from this perspective is that the entire world that appears in me as aware space is already and has always been acting as one or in concert with itself. The world already is truth itself, whether we recognize it or not. And the reason I say that is because I've always been under the impression that the world is becoming, that the world is capable of telling you the truth, that the world is on its way. But now what I feel like emphasizing is that the world is already telling you the truth. The world is already one. It's already perfect and telling us or showing us, demonstrating its perfectness and its oneness. So the world is already truth itself, whether we recognize it or not. It is telling us the secret to life in every single scene just by its very doing. What I have noticed since this experience is that every single aspect of the entire world is informing us continually. You could even go as far as to say that the entire world is nothing more than information. This is also why we need to be very cognizant and intentional about where we indulge our interests. The entire whole of reality is nothing more than a pure potential for every possible variance of life and the manifestation of any specific possibility that is brought about by attention. Sorry about that. We are literally creating the world out of nothingness, but imagination. And it is the specifics of our thoughts and interest that determine the particular variance that arises for us. As our interests evolve, so does the world that we enliven with our awareness. As we grow and expand our understanding of what we are, we illuminate deeper aspects of the potential, thus bringing our entire experience of the world into a broader and more complete perspective. Consider the whole of reality to be a laboratory of sorts, where you could work out ideas and tinker with experiments. The interests and fascinations that you have in life will determine the specifics of what emerges as actuality from the pure potentiality of aware space. But if it sounds like I am advocating the practice of creating your dream world with your personal intentions, then I should point out that I have found the opposite to be true for myself. So, while I do acknowledge that within the scope of appearances, there does appear to be intention and volition, as well as the other appearances, such as independent agency. I do not, however, lose sight of the inherent phantom-like nature of this transient sense of agency or personal volition. Looking at the black and white circle, we see that the appearance of volition arises in the observable top half of the circle. Furthermore, we can see that this emergent sense of volition is once again just a mirrored copy of the original source at the bottom of the circle. The original source is the unchanging stillness itself, while paradoxically being responsible for all of the appearances and movement that manifest in the top half of the circle. And it is not only natural, but inevitable for the emerged vortexes of experience to sense that they possess the same qualities of that which they are merely a reflection of. And in this case, the specific quality of the emerged that we are referring to is the mirrored version of the original stillness that activates the appearance of all movement. And the mirrored version of stillness activating movement would appear to a vortex of individualization as a sense of doership or personal volition. So, while it does indeed appear that as individuated beings, we do possess the capability for intention, it does us good to remind ourselves that any sense of intention is nothing more than an appearance. To put all of this into a more formal context, I will share an insight from the Dzogchen teachings that became the main theme for my entire spiritual journey. This insight was just a side note, but it seemed to put all of religions or philosophies into one of three categories. Any tactic or approach we can take to spirituality, whether it be an actual religion or not, would still fall under one of these three categories. The first of the three categories was referred to as the Sutras. The Sutras represent the path of renunciation. So this would look like someone renouncing eating meat or having sex, or perhaps even more broadly, renouncing all worldly things. My personal impression is that the vast majority of religious or spiritual practitioners are practicing some form of renunciation, whether they realize it or not. I see this not only in the Abrahamic religions, such as Jewish, Christianity, Muslim, or the Vedantic ones, Buddhism, Hinduism, as well. So I not only see this in the Abrahamic religions, but the Vedantic ones as well. The second category is referred to as the Tantras. The Tantras represent the path of transformation. So this would look like someone practicing to transform their anger into compassion, or perhaps more exotically, transforming energy into form like an alchemist. My personal impression is that the amount of those practicing the path of the Tantras is significantly less than the path of the Sutras. And their practices could be transformation of any energy, whether they are doing so as Christians, Buddhists, shamans, or some other type of New Age or occult group. The third and final category is referred to as Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection. Dzogchen represents the path of recognizing that there is nothing to renounce and there is nothing to transform. It is the recognition that everything is already self-perfected, just as it is. This would look like having your life without the thought that you had to renounce anything at all, nor transform or change anything at all. Everything already makes sense as it already is. And even if something does not make sense, then even that makes perfect sense. Now, this is the rarest path of all three. This is the pathless path. So basically there's three paths. There's the path of the Sutras, which is the path of renunciation, the path of the Tantras, which is the path of transformation, and the path of Dzogchen, which is the path of realizing that there's nothing to renounce and nothing to transform. Okay. I now see this world as being very similar to an old American television program called Fantasy Island. The show is a weekly recurring program where a new participant would land on the island to have his fantasies fulfilled. Of course, as the fantasies were realized in time, the participant would see the error of his fantasies in the typical fashion of be careful of what you wish for. So, just as the participants' fantasies turned out to be nightmares, I see this as a perfect analogy for our lives in this apparent duality, or samsara. Whatever you desire, you will realize that desire until you learn from the results of that desire that you actually desire something else. That is until time does its thing, and then you realize that this desire was not fulfilling either. This continues on and on until you reach what I refer to in the first book of the trilogy as the last desire. And that is the desire to desire nothing. I'll go over that just a little bit since I'm not going to assume you read book one, but the desire to desire nothing came from me being sick of myself and all of my desires and my thinking and trying to rearrange the world, control it, whatever, want my preferences to come out. And so I got so sick of wanting that I found myself saying, I just want to not want. That's what I want. I want something, but that thing that I want is to not want anything anymore. And that is what I labeled as my last desire. When I was so done with everything, I was like, my only desire is just to lose these desires. That's the only thing I want. All right. And it is at this point that you graduate from the path of renunciation and the path of transformation and proceed to the path of seeing for yourself that there is indeed nothing to renounce and nothing to transform. This has always reminded me of the end of another American movie called War Games. The movie was about a computer simulation that was used to figure out a perfect sequence of events that would have America winning a nuclear war against Russia. After an incalculable amount of potential options were simulated, in the end, the answer that the computer simulation spit out was that the only way to win the game, nuclear war, was to not play at all. And that is how I felt as I absorbed the Dzogchen teachings year after year. The more I practiced, the more I realized that any movement on my end was in total error. Any building of ideas in my mind had to be let go of. Any sense of trying to manipulate the world had to be let go of. Any sense of this is better than that had to be let go of. Basically, no idea could settle in my mind without me realizing that I had to let go of that too. Any movement that I made was slowly recognized to be the building blocks of my fictitious jail cell. Of course, I know what it is like to experience yourself as a human being. I understand the tendency to spend your whole day defining yourself and defining the world around you. And I totally get the idea that if you organize the world in such a way that maybe we could all make the world a better place. I get that feeling, but ultimately, what I found was that all of the jockeying for position that you do is just further enmeshing yourself in the same fictitious belief that the outside world can provide you the satisfaction that you seek. It's incapable. And this is why I say that it is important to be very mindful of what you are fascinated with in life. My particular fascination or interest in life was that there was something missing from my life. I never quite bought into the conventional view of the world, even as a child. I always felt like there was something much more deeper going on than what I was seeing in the world. So because I was interested in probing beyond what was known to me, the potential manifested as mystery for me. As my fascination of mystery grew, so did my experiences with mystery grow in direct proportion. As the potential rearranged itself to manifest a reality for me that was quickly growing in its ability to demonstrate the mystery for me, my fascination would only grow exponentially. And the more fascinated I got, the more the potential revealed what I was fascinated with, which was mystery. So the cyclic loop of fascination and realization, it just gains in momentum until that which you are fascinated with is fully realized to the point that you are no longer fascinated. You're now satiated. Then a new interest develops and you start the whole process over and over again. But I do not want to get too far from the thought that I was exploring about there being something that was missing from my life, as this topic dovetails perfectly into what may very well be the key to this whole thing. The reason that I always like to come back to the diagram of the black and white circle is because it is actually a map of where the very beginning and end of the entire quest for truth rests. So let's take a look at our map once more, and this time I want you to consider how even as a young child, I was suspicious that something was missing in the world that I was experiencing. I am sure that you could already guess by the diagram above what I was sensed was missing from my experience was this unseen half of my life. I was living from this other unseen half of my existence, but I was not aware of it on any level. So I was living life incompletely. It was only much later in life, as I detailed in Book 1, where my discovery of meditation introduced me to the experience of stillness and silence. And this stillness or silence would ultimately be recognized as the unseen half of my life. I found that the more I cultivated presence in this stillness, the more it completed me as a whole. And perhaps the most profound outcome of complete seeing was not the diminishing of the seen half of my life, but rather the inclusion of the unhalf seen of my life. And by the way, I'm having all these professionally done. But what I was trying to communicate to the artist when I was painting this was I was trying to get rid of the self. There is no self in this picture. There's nothingness and there's appearances. There's everything and there's nothing, but there's not something there. The line just suggests the shape of nothing, is suggesting the illusion of a self, but it's nothing. It's just our fusion where we identify with that, where we mistake ourselves as that. All right. Okay. What I mean by that is that the recognition that you are nothing but aware space for all appearances, it does not diminish or devalue in any way the appearances themselves, but rather it elevates the appearances to be a direct manifestation of the Supreme Source itself. From this perspective, literally everything that appears is ripe with profundity, as each individual thing is smeared together with every other individual thing, revealing all of them to be none other than the whole itself. When we tend to our actual experience of there being nothing behind us in the world in front of us, we find that the nothingness behind us completes us as a whole. It puts the world in front of us into a proper perspective where we find that the world is actually experienced inside of us instead of the other way around. Even the center of our experience is ultimately revealed to be inside of us as aware space. Complete seeing is at once the beginning and the end to the journey of self-realization. One of the results of complete seeing for me was the realization that all of life could be whittled down to the very simple dynamic of life, learning, love. You could view it as a triunistic continuum of life, learning, love, or you could view them individually as everything in existence falling into the category of either being life, learning, or love. And it feels extremely trite to end in my book with the anticlimactic pronouncement that in the end it is all about love, but I am beholden to write what I see, and as unimpressive as it is to say that life, learning, love is my final assessment, I will say it anyway because that is what I see as the truth. So please indulge me as I walk you through something so cliche that you could just as easily have read it in a fortune cookie. At our very essence is life. So it should be no surprise to find life as our base. And what we do as life is to learn, or adapt, or assimilate, to grow, or otherwise evolve in some manner. Again, I realize that it sounds like a corny after-school special to say that all of life is about learning, but when you actually carefully examine your life, you will see that learning is at the center of everything we experience. You could even go as far as saying that we, as individuated beings, are nothing more than the process of learning and assimilating. And this also touches on why I see that everything in the world as being perfect, even though the world that I'm referring to is a world rife with sadness, madness, violence, and brutality. When we examine any form of life, or even the natural processes of life, we will find evidence of certain dynamics that could easily be considered to be destructive. But upon closer examination, they are revealed to be actually vital to the construction of something that has not yet been born yet. It is this process of learning or assimilation that nature instructs us how everything is actually evolving despite the appearance of decaying or exploding. In fact, it is our very own suffering that is our true salvation. It is our suffering that provides us with the desire to grow and evolve. I only say that suffering is good because it ushers in the learning and growing that brings us to our destiny. What our destiny is as individuated beings, I will touch upon after we wrap up this topic. But right now we could look to other forms of life to see how this suffering or destruction is actually the very force for furthering life. So let's start with the seed, since the seed could be a symbol for the entire whole of reality. The seed alone could produce nothing, as the seed alone is pure potential. However, if the seed undergoes what botanists refer to as an agitation of the seed, then this agitation, caused by water, will violently crack the seed open. It is only this violent agitation that is capable of transforming the potential seed into an actual emergent tree. You could literally see this wherever you look. The violence and ferocious heat of raw steel hammered and tempered until it emerges as a superior forged steel. Or we could look at the forceful tension of barometric pressure giving birth to a storm. Or the dark and isolated cocooning of the caterpillar giving way to an evolved butterfly. The examples of life demonstrating its very nature to learn and evolve through its struggles, and I put struggles in quotes, are endless. The examples of life demonstrating love are also endless. But what I found most interesting about where love actually fits in to the grand scheme of things is that love does not inherently exist at all. You would think, based on all of our collective art and culture, that love is where we all came from, and what we're all living from, and what we all hope to return to. But I found this to be the opposite of the truth. What I found was that love does not inherently exist, but rather it emerges from us as a result of this learning. Love is the fruit of life's learning process. As life learns, it recognizes itself in otherness. And this self-attraction is the original love that mirrors itself in duality as a specific love for this or that. Ultimately, love is the returning to yourself as the source. That's the final sacrifice. That's the death. That's the suicide mission. That's the giving of yourself. That's the surrender. So it is the stillness and silence that is our truest expression of love. Our death is our truest expression of love. Our giving ourselves, our dying to ourselves is the highest expression of love. And this brings me back to where I teased the destiny of individualized beings. So, where do I see all of this going? Where does all this lead us in terms of our destination as individualized beings? As aware space, we are timeless, so there is no destiny to speak of. But as individualized beings, what is the next step? Well, I'm not going to get into the Buddhist concept of bardos or reincarnation, as all that information is already out there in the public domain for anyone to research. And it is not that I disbelieve in the bardas or reincarnation. I actually do think that these dynamics are valid and self-verifiable, but I do not see the bardas or the afterlife as being much different than the world that we know now. I regard the afterlife to be just more appearances that come and go, just like the appearances of this world. But I do sense that we as individualized beings do have a destiny that goes beyond the cyclic existence of incarnate phase and discarnate phase of life. And I base this sense on the diamond vision that I had, where I saw that I was the eye behind all eyes. One of the things that I got from that vision was that all of the individualized beings were acting as a colony for a whole. In other words, our lives as individuals are collectively creating a whole that is independent of our individualization. What I saw in that diamond vision was that our feelings, our emotions, and the entirety of our experience as individuals, they coalesce to form the very fabric of this collected whole. We cannot perceive the collective whole because of the vortex of individualization that we are experiencing. But what I saw in the diamond vision was that the formless feelings of emotions of our life, or I should say that it is the formless feelings and emotions of our life that paradoxically give form to this next level collective whole. It is as if the formless energy of our individual experiences are somehow transformed into an ethereal yet substantive form that composes the body of the next collective whole, which we are in the process of creating. But I have no idea if this whole that we are creating is already created, since I was experiencing it outside of time. And the reason I said that is because it did seem active. It did seem as if there was movement, like it was being built. But yet it felt done. You know what I mean? It didn't feel undone. I guess I could say it made me feel active. I don't know. That's why I say I have no idea if this whole that we are creating is already created, since I was experiencing it outside of time, or if we are still in the process of creating it, or of creating this next level of life. But I got the very clear point that our experience as individuals is somehow the actual fabric that is creating this whole. We as individuated beings are the conduits for the whole, as the whole has no capability to experience anything specific. It should come as no surprise to find out that there is absolutely no one or no thing watching over us, as we are the very process of watching. There is no watcher, just watching. And we, as individual folds of awareness, are that process of watching. So welcome to the fold. The end. All right, thank you very much. And that concludes the book. But I do keep discovering things regarding the Triune that I want to include in the discussion. But these realizations are still happening in time. So if I didn't finish the book as I did just now, then I feel like I could just keep writing about this forever. And the book will never get complete. Sorry about that. So consider the rest of the words that you read here to be ideas that have not yet fully emerged from the ethers just yet. So basically what I'm saying is, what I want to convey to you now is so new and it's so still in the oven getting baked that I didn't want to include it in the book, but it feels so close that I do want to at least say what I feel about it now, and then I could take it up at a later point if I feel differently or feel more strongly. Anyway, all right, so back to the triune. What I discovered is that the triune is always made up of a union of two and its emergent property that was created from that union. And I am beginning to see this as a possible loop. So let me break it down for you in super slow motion. And that's another reason why I didn't want to put this in the book. This point is going to be so technical and so bogged down and probably clunky and junky that I didn't want to sully the rest of the book with it. But I feel like it's something there and it's cool, so I want to share it with you. All right, so it all starts with the inseparability of aware space. That's where it all starts with. Boom. Aware space. You can't even say it's two. It's a paradox where it's one, but it's two. All right, so it all starts with the inseparability of aware space. The fact that there is nothing else to be aware of spontaneously and necessarily causes an attraction to itself. So that aware space, because there's nothing else to be aware of, it has no choice but to become aware of itself. And that's what I call the original tension. This is the emergence of magnetic attraction. That's what I call the original tension. Before it manifests in our world as magnetic attraction, before things even exist, it is just tension, just raw tension. This is the emergence of magnetic attraction. Magnetic attraction is when it actually manifests in the world, duality. But still, okay, this is the emergence of magnetic attraction, but still before time, as time is created by the actual cognizance of something, even if that thing is just yourself. So since there is no cognizance at this point in the description, there is no time. It's not until you become cognizant that's when time is born. It is the emergence of this magnetic attraction that draws awareness to itself, thus creating the very first duality, which is awareness of awareness. It's a duality without a duality, or the duet of one. This original consciousness of itself is the birth of time as well as the birth of otherness. This is what I refer to as the original virgin birth. And that takes us to this side of life, now the side of life that we could speak about in time, where we already happened. It is this side of life where the whole dynamic now gets turned on its head. Now it becomes to the attraction to or desire to reunite form in magnetic attraction that results in aware space, which from the perspective of an individuated being seems exactly like death or being formless. And this completes the loop as aware space still has no choice but to become attracted to itself, thus continuing the cycle infinitely. All right, so I realized that was a complicated point, so I will describe that, or I will describe what that process actually looks like, and then I will diagram the point for further clarity. So we start with the original tension of aware space and its emergent magnetism to itself. The result of this attraction to itself manifests as duality or form. So that particular process explains the emergence of form. And now, within this emergence of form, the dynamic is now the mirrored opposite dynamic of the original dynamic. Instead of the inseparability of aware space and its magnetic attraction to itself emerging as form, now we have the union of this emerged form and the magnetic attraction expressed as desire. Taken to its logical conclusion, The pursuit of desires necessarily ends with the last desire, which is the desire to desire nothing. And you could already see where this is going, because the desire to desire nothing will naturally draw you right back to the beginning of simply being born again as aware space, which is tantamount to the death of the individual. And so the cycle continues endlessly. Okay, so if that was not confusing enough, this is how it looks if you diagram the whole thing. I will start with the general schematic of the base, path, and fruit, and then circle back with aware space as the specific original base. I will designate B, P, and F as base, path, and fruit. Also, I should remind you that any emergent fruit instantly becomes its own base. So, the rest of this, I'm actually going to pause and continue on a drawing board. I got a drawing board so I could, now that I'm done with the book, I could start actually outlining stuff, answering questions, and working with you. So I'm going to pause this, and when I turn it back on, we're going to have a sketchboard, and I'm going to sketch this out schematically, and then we could all go home. All right, so let me pause this. All right, so now with this board, what I'm doing is I'm giving you a schematic of the evolution of each triune. So we start with the original one, which is always the base, path, and the fruit. That's right here. The base, let me put my finger here. So the base, path, and fruit, that's the original one. So the union of base, path, and fruit. We start with that one. It's always the base, path, and fruit. So the union of the base, path, and fruit is going to result in, actually, let's start over this way. So the original union, like I say, is the base and the path. That's aware space. That emerges as the fruit. That is the magnetism. Now that fruit is going to become its own base. So now you have the inseparability of the fruit, and the base becomes the path. And then that path becomes now the base. So you have the inseparability of the path and the fruit manifest as starting all over with the base, path, and fruit. All right. So we have the union of base, path, and fruit, which emerges into the fruit and base emerging as the path. Then you have the path and fruit emerging as the base, and that repeats itself infinitely. And I know that sounds horribly complicating, so I'm going to put this out and actually assign things to the base, path, and the fruit, so we actually have something to talk about. All right, so now we'll go over that again, but this time we will designate aware space as the B, or the base. And we're going to designate magnetic attraction as the P, or the path, and creation as the F, or the fruit. So now we have the inseparability. So basically what that looks like in real life is this down here. This is just a general schematic. This is what it actually looks like. We start off with the inseparability of aware space. That manifests as magnetic attraction. So now this magnetic attraction, which is the fruit, it becomes the base, inseparable with the fruit. That you have magnetic attraction, the inseparability of magnetic attraction and aware space manifest as creation. So we start off with aware space can't help but to be attracted, so it creates that original tension. That tension brings aware space to itself, so now you have creation, awareness of awareness. And this is what I called the virgin birth. Now that continues. Now within that creation, within that duality, within that virgin birth, it now has its own base, path, and fruit, where it is now, the creation is now the base, inseparable from the path of magnetic attraction, equaling aware space. And what I mean by that is within creation, we are attracted to ourselves within creation. So that means we're constantly consuming each other, consummating with each other, somehow attracted to each other, whether it's to kill or to have sex, to eat or to consume or to consummate. until we run out that desire. That desire is going to, continue and continue until you extinguish all the desires for the last desire, which you now become aware space, or which is seen as death or enlightenment to us. And then once again, that process starts all over with aware space, once again becoming magnetically attracted to itself, infinitely and infinitely. And the reason that it repeats itself infinitely is because there is a union in time, but outside of time, there is no union, but rather inseparability. The word union implies a coming together, which requires time. But the word inseparable acknowledges the atemporal nature of aware space. And it is that inseparability of aware space that is responsible for the original tension that sets the whole show into motion. And what a show it is. Thank you for being a part of my show. Now enjoy yours. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.